Oh, those lovely Cleveland Browns. What more can you say about them? I'll say plenty about them in this video. When you look at how the 2012 season broke down for the Cleveland Browns, I look at this organization and I always use one of four categories to classify a team. I classify teams that are terrible and in need of a total rebuild. You've also got those teams that are building themselves up to the point of being a contender, contending teams, and then in a lot of ways what I think is the fourth and worst category you can be in, and that is just mediocre. Bad, but not bad enough to get a top 3 draft pick necessarily, and definitely not good enough to be a playoff contender. The Cleveland Browns fall into the bottom portion of that category. They're almost bad enough to get a top 3 pick, but they're just good enough to not have it, basically. They finished 5-11 last year, last in the AFC North, and they are the holders now of the 6th overall pick in the 2013 NFL Draft. Not surprisingly, after a couple of lackluster seasons, Pat Shurmur was removed as head coach. Mike Holmgren's also no longer there. So coaching changes and a big front office shakeup were bound to happen, and they did. When you look at on the field in 2012, the Cleveland Browns offense was pretty mediocre. 24th in points per game, 25th in yards. It looks like the guy they took 3rd overall, Trent Richardson, he got close to a 1,000-yard season, didn't quite get there. He wasn't the best of the rookie running backs, but Richardson looks like a keeper for sure for them. You have their other first-round pick, Brandon Weeden. He had moments, I thought, where he was at least good, and then he had other moments where he flat-out sucked, which is not good when he's already a 29, soon-to-be 30-year-old quarterback going into a second NFL season. You expected Brandon Weeden to come in if they were going to draft him in the first round and be very good right away. And especially in a rookie class that had Andrew Luck and RG3 and guys like Russell Wilson, you were going to think you were going to get a little bit more out of Weeden. I think Tannehill, quite frankly, outplayed him. It's really evident, though, after watching this team's offense, that they're really lacking talent at wide receiver and tight end. I think their offensive line is solid. They have a solid running game. Quarterback play, obviously that's the biggest question of all. But it doesn't help when they lack as much talent at wide receiver and tight end as they do. I mean, even if Weeden was very, very good, his best wide receiver clearly is Josh Gordon. And after that, Muhammad Massaquoi, Greg Little, please. Defensively, this is a team that I wouldn't classify as horrible on defense. They had moments where they played well and they kept the team in games, and other games where they were just overmatched. They finished overall 23rd in yardage allowed and 25th against the pass. So even though there were moments where they played all right, the defensive side of the ball also needs addressing. And you look at the offseason moves made so far by the Cleveland Browns, Rob Chudzinski, hard enough name to say, former offensive coordinator from the Carolina Panthers, comes back home to Cleveland, and he's now the head man in charge of trying to help right this ship. There's a whole new front office brain trust in place, including former Browns personnel man Michael Lombardi, who a lot of Cleveland Browns fans, I think, still hold a lot of resentment towards because he was a part of the Bernie Kosar release in 1993. You also get a positive acquisition, I think, in Norv Turner coming in to be the offensive coordinator. As an offensive coordinator, Norv Turner has a great track record of getting a lot out of the quarterbacks that he works with. So there is some at least, reason for optimism that maybe the Browns organization is finally starting to get it and maybe will actually get onto the path of working their way towards the playoffs. In terms of free agents, they don't have a ton of notable free agents, but they have guys like Phil Dawson, who may retire, may not, Joshua Cribbs, Kaluka Maivia, Sheldon Brown. They have a few free agents that are, at least if nothing else, with the exception of Dawson, who's been the one mainstay and steady for that organization for many years, you have guys that are free agents that are, if nothing else, good role players, or guys that don't hurt you if you have them in your lineup as a team. But if maybe you let them go, they're not exactly going to kill you either. Now, ultimately, you wonder why the Browns have stunk for a number of years. There are many reasons for it, and one of the biggest ones is, guess what? The NFL Draft. The Cleveland Browns draft history over the past 5 years is checkered, to say the very least. 2008 was pretty much a lost draft with the exception of 6th-round pick Atia Rubin. because you look at it, they had traded their first-round pick in the previous year's draft to get Brady Quinn with, I believe, the 22nd overall pick after they had already taken Joe Thomas, that stud, 3rd overall. Then they traded away, I think it was, what was it, their 2nd-round pick and their 3rd-round pick as well for defensive players. You know, that was the greatness of Eric Mangini. Ugh, God. So as a result, it wasn't that surprising in 2009. Even though they were in the position to take Mark Sanchez, maybe it worked out better for them. They dumped back a couple times in the first round. It ended up getting Alex Mack, the center. 2011, they traded back again, this time when the Atlanta Falcons wanted to make a big move up the board to go draft Julio Jones. They dropped back again, and you could sit there and say, well, maybe that was a mistake. They should have just taken Julio Jones to begin with, and you could definitely make that argument. When you look at their 2012 first round, they took Richardson. They ended up moving up to get him 3rd overall, and then took Brandon Weeden with the 22nd pick, and then in the 2nd round took Mitchell Schwartz, when I thought maybe they should have drafted a wide receiver there. They, over the past 5 years, have found some nice players, you know, guys such as Joe Hayden and Jabal Sheard, Kaluka Maivia, Atia Rubin. There have been some nice guys. Trent Richardson, I think, will definitely fall into that category. But they've really failed to find big-time impact players, you know, stars. It's good to have serviceable players. It's good to find good role players in the draft. That is important. But at some point in time, you've got to get stars. You've got to get real impact players. And that, to me, has been the biggest failure of the Cleveland Browns organization. And it goes beyond just their failure to find a long-term answer at the quarterback position. It goes into not having a star at wide receiver or tight end, not having a star defensive player. They just lack real impact players, because sometimes it's those impact players that help you win those close games. So now, as it transition into the 2013 NFL draft, I think the Browns, if nothing else, need to be in a position where they're trying to find 2 or 3 potential real impact players. Now, you would assume with an offensive guy taking over as head coach that the focus of this first draft would be on the offensive side of the ball, especially in the first couple of rounds. And there is definitely an argument to be made. Unfortunately, where the Cleveland Browns are positioned in the first round, the 6th overall pick, the pickings are very slim in terms of offensive players at that point. Unless they determine that a guy like Cordero Patterson from Tennessee or Keenan Allen from California are just flat out too good of prospects to pass up, and they don't want to get cute, and they just say, screw it, we're going to take them there. There's no real impact tight end, obviously, that you could take 6 overall. They really don't have a need on the offensive line. And I think 1 year after taking Brandon Weeden, that taking a quarterback 6th overall would be a mistake too, because that would basically make the previous year's first-round pick a total waste. So then you shift focus to the defensive side of the ball. This tends to be viewed, and understandably so, as a better draft for defensive talent, especially talent along the front 4 in the first round. And there are players that could come in and potentially have an impact for the Cleveland Browns right away, whether that be maybe a guy like a Jarvis Jones, a Barkevious Mingo, even though I think it's a bit high for him. If a guy like Ezekiel Ansah has a phenomenal combine, there's a guy that's a possibility as well. The thing is where I look at the Browns, quite frankly, with them drafting 6th overall, you could also almost say that they could be candidates to try and move down in the draft. Obviously, you have to find a willing trade partner. So the Browns are kind of in that situation where, because they were just mediocre enough where they didn't get a top 3 pick, but they weren't good enough to be a playoff contender, they're in a non-favorable draft position when you look at their overall team needs. And this is where I think they just need to go with the focus of the best player available, assuming they stand pat at number 6. They've traded back in 2009. They traded back in 2011. And it's produced some good role players, but they still lack impact players. So I think whoever they decide to take at number 6, the focus should be that he's the best player available, you know, regardless maybe of position of need, and he brings an instant impact and some star power to a team that desperately needs it. Throughout the rest of the draft, they need to do a job of trying to find a tight end, whether that be Ertz from Stanford or Eifert from Notre Dame. If one of those 2 guys drops to the 2nd round, they need to find better help at wide receiver for Brandon Weeden or whoever is going to play quarterback for the Browns in 2013, because it seems like Chudzinski and Norv Turner haven't made a commitment that Brandon Weeden is going to be the guy this upcoming season. As much as they need to improve on the offensive side, like I said, though, they have to get some type of impact star player. They need a couple of them out of this draft. It'd be great for them if they came out of this draft with a great pass rusher in the first round, and then a playmaking tight end in the second round, and maybe a legit possession receiver in the third round. It'll be very interesting to see, but the Cleveland Browns, if they don't start getting some star power, if they don't get some impact players starting with this draft, are just going to continue to float along in that same bubble of being 5-11, 6-10, 7-9 every year, which to me, frankly, is the worst possible position you can be in the NFL.